Thank you. So first of all, several people said that they really appreciated me going around and that they wouldn't have dared ask a question otherwise. So that's wonderful. So someone said, have I convinced anyone to think like this? And the answer is yes, I believe I have. So several generations of my art students have been very enthused about how this helps them, not just in their art practice, but also in their life. And a common thing they say at the end of the semester is that they wish they had been taught maths like this at school, which is why I hope that we can do that. Also, many people who are in maths adjacent subjects who haven't necessarily thought about issues in this way, but are very ready to, often because, for example, they might be in a very male-dominated field like programming. I've spoken at a lot of programming conferences where it's very white male-dominated. But those people haven't exactly felt like they're at the top of the hierarchy of traditional masculinity all the time. So they're really appreciative of these different ways of thinking about things. And it can go both ways. So people who've thought a lot about social hierarchies find it really helpful that there's a way that they can talk to people who haven't thought so much about social hierarchies, who might be extremely logical thinkers, and that the kind of combination of using abstraction to empathize with people, because what I find is that I can find my place in one of those cube structures, and then I can build another cube structure where I'm in a different place, and then I can empathize with what it's like to be in different places in that cube relative to different forms of privilege. And so that has also been very helpful to convince people. Someone asked, what have I enjoyed abstracting the most? And it was definitely a very aha moment. The two things in this talk that I distinctly remember going, oh wow, this is a way. So one is that cube of privilege thing, and the other one is the diagram of analogies, where I realized I could understand practically every contentious argument on the internet in this way. And it really helped me, because it's very frustrating watching contentious arguments on the internet happen. But I do feel like I understand them all now, and that's another bold claim, but I'm just going to keep making those bold claims. So someone asked, how can you understand the things you can't see? So this was relating to what I said about bicycles and how I miss being able to see how things work all the time. And how can you go about understanding things you can't see and making diagrams of them? And I think the answer is that because I've practiced this a lot, this is how it helps me, that people have said to me before, how do you come up with those diagrams? And the answer is that because I do this a lot, my brain is very attuned. I've used the word practice 4 times in that sentence. My brain has got very used to making those connections. And when you the brain is malleable, right? So when you start making connections, you literally make connections in your brain, I think. And that then you get more attuned to those possibilities. And so there's nothing specific I can say, like, drink this, followed by eating this food, and then ping, say the magic words, and you'll be able to make these diagrams. But just that once you start doing it, then you see it more all the time. And my students say to me that they start seeing things around them, or they see patterns, and that reminds them of something else. And so sometimes it's just about being a little bit dreamy and realizing that something reminds you of something else. And that is what I think is the point of studying abstract maths in terms of how it can help you in your life, that if you practice it, then you see those things coming up in life some more. So somebody else said, is there a way of doing it non-visually for visually impaired people? And this is something that is preying on me. Is that the right word? Is it preying on me? It's weighing on me. It's weighing on me. Because, yeah, I do worry. What I do is very visual, and for people who can't see that, I don't know how to help them. I will also say that there have been some quite famous visually impaired and blind abstract mathematicians who've been able to do more because they're not constrained by the constraints of the visual world. And the most famous one, probably, is Morin. Is his name Bernard Morin, who came up with the E-version of a sphere, which is a way of kind of turning a sphere inside out, which is completely impossible to imagine visually, but he couldn't see, and then he came up with it. It's kind of a cool story. Shall we take an online question?
Yep. So one of them from online is, what can studying the relationships between things teach us about the nature of reality?
what can studying the relationships between things teach us about the nature of reality? Well, I think that everything is relative, right? I think that that's a really important starting point, and not just because of general relativity, but just, there is also that. But just because I think if we understand that, then I think we can understand. I'm answering you as if it's your question, but that if we can understand that, then I think it helps us to be more flexible about how we view the world, realizing that we're all just doing things in a context, and that it's not fixed, and that if we look at it from another direction, we will see something else. And actually, one of my students said to me last week, I teach a course on maths and music, and this is relevant to some of the questions here about how maths is related to music, and I used to hate that question because as a mathematician and a musician, I got asked it a lot, along with, oh, of course you're good at maths and music, you're Asian. But I realized that there is a point to the question, and I used to think that maths and music were the opposites for me, and that they were totally complementary, and that I used one to balance out the other. But then I realized that I'm using abstract mathematical thinking to approach everything I do in life, including music. Because when we play music, if we play Western classical music, which I do, especially the piano, which has a lot of notes, you don't read each note individually. Just like when we read books, hopefully we don't read each letter individually, because that would take way too long. And one of the first steps of learning to read is learning how to group letters together into words, and then we group words together into sentences. So to play a big piece of music on the piano, you have to group the notes into chords, and then you group the chords into phrases, and then you group the phrases into structures. And all of that is about putting disparate things into units via their relationships with each other, so that you can then move them around your brain in a single unit. And then the piece gets smaller and smaller and smaller in your head, because in the end it's just 3 sections, and that's it. Now it's just 3 things, whereas previously it was 10,000 notes. And then there's also things like symmetry. And so the thing that my students said this week, we've been studying melodic inversion, which is where you take a melody and you flip it upside down across, so you perform a reflection across a horizontal line. And they told me that they had attended a session about dealing with anti-Semitism, they're Jewish, and that they had been taught the technique where if someone says something offensive, you just say it back to them. And they said that it reminded them of melodic inversion, and that it's the same thing, but just viewed from the other side, and that can help people see a different aspect of it. I thought that was a lovely connection that they made. I wouldn't necessarily say that math helped them solve a problem, but it gave them a point of contact between different things, and I think sometimes that's what this is about. Should we take a question from the gallery?
Do you want to pick? It relates quite nicely to what you were just talking about. So related to maths and music, do you have any applied courses in maths that you could recommend, so something that kind of bridges academia and other applied sectors?
I don't know about courses. Is that like degree courses? Or, I teach this class on maths and music, which I love teaching, but that's at the school, the Art Institute, so unless you're a student there, you can't take it. But was it a question about online courses? Or
I think any just kind of less intense than a whole degree, more kind of extracurricular course, or just some kind of extra learning to do with the application of maths in other industries. That might be the wrong interpretation of your question, but
there are a lot of online resources. There are a lot of online resources at the moment, and one I'm thinking of that is on maths and music specifically is one of the great courses by Professor Dave Kung. But I don't typically, the applications I do are to do with social justice and politics. And so one of my previous books, The Art of Logic in an Illogical World, is that, basically, using mathematical thinking and logical thinking to elucidate social and political arguments. And that relates to a question someone asked over here, which was, have I sat down with politicians to get them to think more clearly in this way? And the answer is no, I haven't. I'm not enthusiastic about sitting down in a room with politicians, but I see what you mean, and if someone else wants to sit down with them and get them to think like this, then that would be great. There is a mathematician who I was a postdoc with in Chicago, Daniel Biss, who became a politician, and he became a state senator in Illinois, and then he's now mayor of the city of Evanston. And so it's kind of interesting. He tried to make a more sensible tax system that would be continuous instead of stepwise, instead of having gaps in that no one understood it, and so it didn't get through. Should we take another online question?
Yep. So a couple of people have asked, what are the limitations in category theory, and are there any circumstances where category theory is not appropriate to use?
The limitations in all of mathematics are your imagination and curiosity. I think, unfortunately, too often people think that they are limited by their own biological existence, or they think that their brain isn't up to it or something, and I don't think that's true. I think that brains are malleable, and that everybody can learn to do more, and we don't know. I'm not saying that everybody can be Einstein, just like I can't be Usain Bolt, but everybody can progress, and we can't say in advance what anyone's limit is going to be, and so I don't think it's helpful to say what anyone's limit is. That wasn't the question, but I decided to say it anyway. So category theory, categories have axioms, and so one of the axioms is that you have to be able to compose morphisms, which means you have to be able to go along one thing and then do another one. So if you're in a situation where you go along one thing and then even though you can get from here to here, that doesn't mean you can get all the way along from there to there. If you're somehow in that situation, then you wouldn't be able to use category theory. But I don't know what that would be, and there's probably some more nuanced kind of form of category where you could do that, and that relates to some questions people had about when you move from sets to categories where you add relationships in, is there another move you can do? Which also someone else sort of asked the same question a different way, which is where they said, if we're studying relationships, is there some form of relationship between the relationships? And the answer is yes, you just invented higher dimensional category theory. Excellent. And so the next level up is a two-dimensional category where you don't just have objects and relationships between them, but you have relationships between those, which gives you another level of nuance. And so, for example, if you're having an argument with someone about books, and someone goes, this book's better, and then someone goes, no, that book's better. That's a kind of zero-dimensional argument where no one has said anything. So then you might go, well, in what sense is this book better than this one? And you might go, well, this book is better in the sense that it has a better plot. And you might go, well, this book is better in the sense that it had more interesting characters. And then you can compare those relationships. You can go, well, which do I prefer? Am I more interested in plot or characters? And that's another level of nuance that you can then get into your conversation. And that's why I do higher dimensional category theory, because I love all those extra layers of nuance. Should we take another question from the gallery?
Yeah, this is quite a big question.
Okay.
But how does maths apply to other sciences like chemistry and biology?
Great question. So I was at this AI conference last week going around telling everyone, yes, category theory is relevant to AI. It really is. People are interested in, and it's even relevant, it's relevant to physics, computer programming, biology, chemistry. And then I realized that there was a very high-powered chemist sitting at the table. And I thought, oh no, he's going to ask me how it relates to chemistry. And I don't actually know. I've just heard. But what actually happened was that he looked at me and he said, say your name again. And I don't think he's watching, but I hope he doesn't mind me telling this story. He said, say your name again. So I said, and he goes, I've read your book. I used your book to learn category theory. And I used it to show that I could do this construction. And then I got lost again. But he did use it. And so, category theory is a really great framework for understanding structure, and two things. For understanding how structure composes with other structure. So if you want to take some small things and build them up into a big thing, which is what we need to do the whole time because life is so complicated, how else can we understand it except by taking it in small pieces and then sticking it together? So category theory is a framework for understanding how to stick things together. And category theory is also a framework for understanding how to transfer things to different contexts and maintain their structure. And so that is why it is of relevance to anyone who deals with putting things together and transferring things to different contexts. And so the people talking about large language models, it's very category theory because you understand a word just by its relationship with words around it, and then you move it to a different language, find the place where it's got the same structure, and then you understand that that will be the equivalent word in that language. But that's why you need a huge data set to practice on, because if you've only got, say, 200 words, then it's very unlikely to be a very nuanced structure, and it'll be a bit vague. But then they've done this on data sets of something like 3 trillion words and phrases. So they have a huge quantity of relationships, and then it can get quite accurate. So I think I wandered off in some different direction from that question, but hope that's all right. So let's see what other questions. Somebody asked, what is my pitch to art students? So there are some teachers who love trying to help students who've previously hated maths, so thank you for doing that. It's really important work. And I think that we don't appreciate the work that school teachers do nearly enough. So thank you for that. What I say is that first of all, I just all out say, if you have previously hated maths, this might be a course for you, because I will do it completely differently. And I tell them that it's not all about getting the right answer, and in fact that I will never judge them on whether they got the right answer or not, and that it will be more about exploration, and I will get them to make up their own things and explore. We do lots of building activities, so we do kind of crafty activities where we explore things, where we find relationships rather than getting the right answers, and where I will value their opinions about what we're doing and let them make choices. So if they want to do something differently, like something, a classic thing that everyone hates, like the order of operations. So why do you have to do the order of operations like that? Well, you don't. If you want to do it another way, you do it another way and see what happens. And the worst that happens is you make a contradiction and then your whole world implodes. It's all right. It's an abstract world. We can just make another world immediately, which is one of the wonderful things about maths that makes it's such a shame people are afraid of it, because you will not get hurt. But your feelings will get hurt because people are mean to you. But you won't actually break a limb. So I'm scared of skiing and snowboarding and skydiving and all those things, because I might get physically hurt. So it makes me sad that people are afraid of maths, even though you won't get physically hurt. And so another thing that I use in my pitch is because this relates to what someone else said about what I've learned from the art students, because I hope we all agree that education, when it's done well, is not just a one-way process. It's an all-directions process where everyone in the room learns from everyone else. And I love learning from the art students what put them off maths in the past and try to discover what can put them back on it. And one of the things I truly believe is that I need to find out what motivates them and tap into that motivation, rather than just taking what motivates me and plonking it on their head. And it's very interesting, because I'm interested in it, but my first book, How to Bake Pie, was all about maths and food. And that came about because I was teaching at the University of Sheffield, and I realized that the thing that really woke my students up was food. And so I did loads of food things. And then I got to the art school, and that didn't seem to interest them as much. And what I discovered was the thing that really got them interested was questions of social justice, social injustice, and politics. And this really came up during the 2016 election cycle, when I realized that they were so afraid of what was going on in that election that if they came into my classroom and I didn't talk about it, they wouldn't listen to anything I said, because they were so afraid of what was going on in that election. And then I realized that I could talk about it, and that I could use abstract mathematics to understand it. And so now I make that absolutely part of the course description, that to say I will talk about these issues that they really care about racism and about sexism and all the possible forms of prejudice and bigotry, and how we can try and understand people who disagree with us, and voter suppression and voting systems. And that is something that they really care about. And so sometimes people say to me, oh, when you talk about these issues, aren't you afraid you're going to put people off who don't want to talk about those issues? And the thing is, when I used to not talk about those issues, nobody said to me, aren't you afraid you'll put people off who really care about those issues? And one of the reasons my students have been put off maths is because they don't see it addressing the issues that really matter to them, like racial injustice and socioeconomic issues and income disparity and things. And so when I then use it to discuss things they really care about, then it gets them much more interested in what I'm talking about. And so it really depends on your students and why they've been put off maths in the past. But that's been what I've found with art students, and also many students who've been put off maths for other reasons. so I've done music. Somebody said, can I talk more about 4D circles? And so, so a circle is the collection of all points in space that are the same distance away from a center. And so you can do that in three-dimensional space, and then what you get is a sphere, because if you take all the points in three-dimensional space that are the same distance away from a point, it's a sphere. So what even is four-dimensional space? Well, one way that was thought up by Einstein is to think of it as space-time. But the fourth dimension doesn't have to be time. The fourth dimension can be anything. We just don't have 3 space dimensions, so it's hard to think about it. But abstractly, we're thinking in 4 dimensions every time we evaluate something according to 4 criteria. And so if we think about what we want to eat for lunch, then we might think about how close the shop is to us, how much it's going to cost, what kind of food it has, and how fast the service is. And that's already a 4-dimensional space. And so actually, we evaluate everything according to way more than 4 criteria all the time. So we're all thinking in infinite dimensions. And that's what a 4-dimensional space is. And then a circle in that 4-dimensional space is all the points that are the same distance away from some point in that 4-dimensional space. It's quite difficult to picture, but if you think about it enough, you create an image in your head. I have an image in my head of 4-dimensional space and of a 4-dimensional sphere. I can't describe it to you because I don't know what it looks like. But I have it in my head, and it's just one of those things that you develop. Just like if you read a book, then you probably have an image in your head of the characters, and everyone else will have a different image in their head of the characters. And isn't that wonderful? And I love that about abstract things. Someone asked if abstraction can help with the fear of dying. And I think it can help with everything, although I'm not quite sure. I mean, it's helped me. I have a big fear of dying, and I think it has helped me a little bit if I think about me as not a physical being with intrinsic characteristics, but me as someone relating to other people. And that the things I do relating to other people include the books I write and the work that I do. And that will carry on after me, the physical being with intrinsic characteristics, is no longer being. And so that is as far as it has helped me. That it hasn't overcome my fear, but it has sort of given me a little bit of solace. Oh dear, I've written issues. I think that must be, oh yes, I remember. Are there other issues that I wish people would use this way of thinking to think about? And there are some other issues that I haven't quite pinned down yet that I really want to think about. One of them is when pressures can push people in opposite directions. The same pressures can push people in opposite directions for different reasons. And so, for example, social pressure on straight women has been to get married for across several generations of history, whereas social pressure, oppression of gay people has been that they are not allowed to get married. And so now liberation of gay people consists of getting married because that's fighting against the previous oppression, whereas liberation for certainly some straight women is to not get married because it was a pressure. And there are some other situations where I've thought about how the liberation from the past oppression is in opposite directions because the oppression was itself in opposite directions. And so I think that's something, there's some kind of twisted product structure going on. And it's like the fact that being male is typically an advantage over being female, except, for example, not for black men in America, because black men in America have worse outcomes overall than black women in America. And so that's another case where the pressures go in opposite directions a little bit. And I haven't quite exactly pinned down what's going on in those cases, but I think there's something to be said. Is there another online or gallery question that we'd like to take? We have, -8 seconds left.
We have one more question.
So maybe someone just wanted me to demonstrate putting the jacket in the pocket. So I suppose I'll do that. And I should probably take out the gloves from my pockets before I do that. And so the point here is that when I examined the instructions, they didn't make any sense. But when I examined the pocket, see, it's connected all the way down the side. So the only possible way to get it in is by turning it inside out. And so I'm not on commission, but so then there's this strap that was previously attached on the other side. And so you can just kind of, it looks really implausible, but it does actually it's like stuffing a sleeping bag into the bottom of your rucksack when you're going camping. And it is a bit like a sleeping bag. There. And then you can pull the string like this, and then you can carry it on your shoulder. Thank you very much.
So we are the Royal Institution, the home of the demonstration. Thank you everyone for joining us in person, and thank you everyone for joining us online. Another round of applause and special thanks to you, Eugenia Cheung.
Thank you. Thank you very much.